Welcome to our deep dive into the world of business. We've got this really interesting business awareness textbook, and it looks like we're going to be covering a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating stuff. It's not just about how businesses are structured. It also gets into, what makes them tick, what makes some succeed, and others, face challenges.
It's like we're getting a blueprint for understanding any business we come across, right?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. So maybe we should start with the basics, like how are businesses structured? What are the different forms they can take?
Okay, so the textbook talks about sole traders, partnerships, LLPs, and companies. Like, what's the difference? Why would someone choose one over the other?
Right, yeah. It's not just picking a name, it's about liability, who's responsible if things go wrong. It's about ownership, too. Like, how easy is it to transfer ownership?
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here, so let's break it down. What's a sole trader exactly?
Well, a sole trader is basically just one person running the whole show.
Yeah.
They get all the profits, but they're also personally responsible for all the debts. So it's high risk, high reward.
So it's like the classic entrepreneur, right? The one-person business owner.
Exactly. You see it a lot with, small businesses, skilled trades, things like that. But yeah, if things go bad, their personal assets are on the line.
That's a lot of pressure. Makes sense why some people would want to team up then. What about partnerships?
Right. Partnerships are when two or more people come together, they pool their resources. Maybe they have different skills they bring to the table. They share the workload, the profits, but also typically unlimited liability, like sole traders.
So more brains, but still, that risk factor's there. What if you want to limit that liability, though?
Well, that's where companies come in. Companies are separate legal entities. So it's like the company itself is responsible for its debts, not the owners.
I see. So it's like a shield for the owners protecting their personal assets.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Yeah. But, of course, there's more paperwork, more regulations with companies, so it's more complex to set up and run.
Okay, makes sense. Now, what about these LLPs? They seem like a mix of a partnership and a company.
Right. LLPs, or limited liability partnerships, they kind of combine the flexibility of a partnership with that limited liability protection of a company.
Interesting. So who usually goes for an LLP?
You see it a lot with professionals, like doctors, lawyers, that sort of thing. They want to work together, but they also want to limit their personal risk.
So choosing the right structure is really about figuring out your needs and your risk tolerance. Makes sense. But regardless of the structure, every business needs money to get started, right?
Absolutely. Funding is crucial. The textbook outlines a few options. You can use your own savings, which is called bootstrapping.
Ah, so you're using your own resources, no outside investors.
Exactly. You have full control, but you're limited by what you personally have.
Then there's bringing in outside investors, right? What's that called again?
That's capital introduced. It could be a great way to, get a larger sum of money, maybe get some expertise from those investors, but you're sharing ownership.
It's like a trade-off. More resources, but less control.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a big decision.
What about loans?
Loans are common, but you have to pay them back with interest. You might need collateral, something to secure the loan.
So it's a risk. What if your business doesn't take off?
Right. That's why it can be hard for brand new businesses to get loans, especially large ones.
Okay, that makes sense. The textbook also mentions managing working capital as a funding option. What's that all about?
Working capital, think of it like the cash you have on hand to cover your day-to-day operations. Managing it well is key for any business, whether you're just starting out or you've been around for a while.
So it's about making sure you have enough to pay your bills, buy supplies, all that.
Exactly. It's about creating a financial cushion so you can handle unexpected costs or maybe jump on an opportunity that pops up.
Okay, so we've got the structure of businesses down, and we've talked about funding. But what about the bigger picture, the economic environment that every business operates in?
Right. The textbook dives into that too. It breaks it down into two levels, microeconomics and macroeconomics.
So micro is the close-up view, and macro is the zoomed-out perspective.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Like, micro focuses on individual businesses, consumers, specific markets. Macro looks at the whole economy, national income, inflation, unemployment, things like that.
Okay, I'm starting to see the layers here.
Right.
So let's start with micro. What are the key forces at play there?
Well, the textbook focuses on supply and demand. They're the driving forces behind, pretty much every market.
Supply being how much of something is available, and demand being how much people want to buy it, right?
Yeah, and the price of something is usually determined by that balance between supply and demand.
So if there's a lot of demand for something but not much supply, the price goes up.
Right. Think of a limited edition sneaker or a concert ticket everyone wants. High demand, limited supply. The price skyrockets.
Okay, that makes sense. But the price isn't the only thing that affects supply and demand, right? The textbook mentions consumer income and interest rates too.
Yeah, absolutely. Think about it. If people have more money, they're likely to buy more things, right? So demand can increase when incomes rise.
Makes sense. But how do interest rates play into all this?
Well, interest rates affect how much it costs to borrow money. If interest rates are high, it's more expensive to borrow, so businesses might invest less and consumers might buy less, especially big-ticket items.
So it's like a chain reaction. One thing affects another, and it all impacts the economy.
That's exactly it. Understanding these connections is key for businesses to make smart decisions, to anticipate what might happen in the market.
Now, the textbook also gets into different types of goods. It talks about normal goods, inferior goods, luxury goods, and necessities. I'm curious, how do those categories fit into all of this?
Well, it's all about how demand for these goods changes when people's income changes, right? So take a necessity, like bread or milk. People need those things, even if they have less money.
Okay, so the demand for necessities stays pretty steady.
Yeah, but inferior goods are different. Demand for those actually goes up when incomes are lower. Think of, like, cheaper store brand products. People
Yeah.
might switch to those when they're trying to save money.
Makes sense. So inferior goods benefit from tough economic times.
In a way, yeah. And then you have luxury goods. Those are the things people buy when they have extra money to spend. So demand for those goes up when incomes are higher.
Like designer clothes, fancy vacations, things like that.
Exactly. So understanding these categories helps businesses figure out how their products might be affected by, changes in the economy.
Okay, that's super helpful for anyone starting a business. What about competition? Every business faces that, right?
Oh, yeah. Competition's a huge factor. The textbook talks about how things like product features, branding, pricing, all of that can impact how competitive a business is.
So businesses need to find ways to stand out, to offer something unique.
Exactly. Think of all the different coffee shops out there. They all sell coffee, but they each try to create a different experience, a different vibe to attract customers.
Okay, and then there's this concept of buying power, which the textbook explains with the example of a big supermarket chain. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. Buying power is basically the influence a customer has over their suppliers because of how much they buy from them. So a huge supermarket chain, they buy tons of products from their suppliers.
Right, they place massive orders.
So they have a lot of power to negotiate prices, to basically dictate terms to those suppliers.
Wow. So it's like being a really big fish in a small pond.
Exactly. It can be good for the supplier, getting that steady business, but they're also at the mercy of that big customer.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive. We've talked about business structures, funding, supply and demand, different types of goods, competition, and buying power. It feels like we're building a solid foundation for understanding how businesses work.
Yeah, we've laid a lot of groundwork. And all of this sets the stage for diving into the broader economic landscape, the macro view, which we'll explore in our next session. Okay, so picking up where we left off, we're going to zoom out a bit and look at the macroeconomic environment. Remember that ship analogy? Now we're thinking about the whole ocean, all those big forces that can affect businesses no matter how well they're run.
So we're talking about things that are way bigger than just one business, right? Like national or even global trends.
Exactly. And the textbook introduces this framework called pestle analysis, which helps break down these macro-level factors into different categories.
Okay, so what does PESTLE stand for?
It stands for political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental. It's a really helpful way to systematically analyze the external environment that a business operates in.
Okay, that makes sense. So starting with P for political, what kinds of things fall under that category?
Well, government policies are a big one. Things like tax regulations, trade agreements, environmental policies, all of those can have a huge impact on businesses.
Right, I can see how a change in tax law could make a big difference to a company's bottom line.
Absolutely. And then there's political stability, too. If a country is going through a lot of political turmoil, that creates a lot of uncertainty for businesses, makes it harder to plan for the future.
So businesses would prefer to operate in stable political environments.
Yeah, definitely. Stability makes it easier to predict what's going to happen, which is good for business. Okay, so moving on to E for economic. We talked about microeconomics before, so what's different about macroeconomics?
Yeah, remind me.
Well, macro looks at the bigger picture, the overall health of the economy. Things like interest rates, inflation, unemployment rates, economic growth, all those factors that can affect, how much people are spending, how much businesses are investing, basically how the whole economic engine is running.
Right. So if the economy is doing well, businesses generally do well too.
Yeah, there's definitely a correlation there. But of course, individual businesses can still struggle even when the overall economy is strong, and vice versa. It's not a perfect one-to-one relationship, but the macro environment definitely sets the stage.
Okay, on to S for social factors now. What are some examples of social trends that can impact businesses?
Oh, there are tons. Demographics are a big one.
Yeah.
Changes in population size, age distribution, cultural values, all those can influence what people want to buy and how they want to buy it.
Right. So if a country has a growing population of older people, for example, that might create new opportunities for businesses that cater to their needs.
Exactly. And then there are things like social values and attitudes. Those are constantly evolving too.
Mm.
Like the growing awareness of sustainability, the demand for ethical products. That's a social trend that's having a huge impact on businesses across all sorts of industries.
So it's not just about knowing what people want, it's also about understanding why they want it.
Exactly. Businesses need to be able to anticipate those shifts in values and adapt accordingly. Otherwise, they risk getting left behind. Okay, moving on to T for technological factors. This was probably pretty obvious, given how fast technology changes these days.
Yeah, it feels like there's always some new gadget or app or software coming out. How can businesses keep up with all that change?
It's definitely a challenge,
Hmm.
but the textbook emphasizes the importance of being proactive, of embracing innovation. Businesses need to invest in research and development. They need to be constantly exploring new technologies and figuring out how those technologies can be used to improve their products, their services, their operations.
So it's not just about buying the latest tech, it's about understanding how it can actually benefit your business.
That's right. It's about using technology strategically rather than just chasing after the next shiny object. Okay, on to L for legal factors. This one might not be as flashy as technology, but it's definitely important.
Yeah, laws and regulations can have a huge impact on how businesses operate.
Absolutely. Everything from employment laws to consumer protection laws to intellectual property laws, all of those create a framework that businesses have to operate within. And those laws can change over time, so businesses need to stay informed and make sure they're in compliance.
Right. I imagine it can be especially tricky for businesses that operate in multiple countries because each country might have different laws.
Yeah, international business law can get pretty complicated. There's a whole field of law dedicated to it. Okay, finally, we've reached E for environmental factors. This one's become increasingly important in recent years, with the growing awareness of climate change and other environmental issues.
Yeah, it feels like consumers are paying more attention to the environmental impact of the products they buy and the companies they support.
Absolutely. And businesses are responding to that. Sustainability has become a major focus for a lot of companies. They're looking for ways to reduce their environmental footprint, to conserve resources, to adopt more sustainable practices.
So it's not just about being environmentally responsible, it's also become a smart business strategy.
Exactly. Consumers are voting with their wallets these days, and they're increasingly choosing to support businesses that are committed to sustainability. So it's good for the planet and it's good for the bottom line.
Okay, so we've covered all 6 elements of the PESTLE framework. It feels like we've gotten a really good overview of the macroeconomic forces that can shape the business world.
Yeah, we've laid a lot of groundwork. And remember, all these factors are interconnected. A political change can have economic consequences, which can lead to social shifts and so on. It's a complex system, but understanding these macro trends can help businesses be more prepared for whatever comes their way.
Okay, so we've explored the macro environment. Now let's shift our focus to a specific group of people who are crucial to any business stakeholders. Who are stakeholders exactly?
The textbook defines stakeholders as anyone who has an interest or concern in a business. This could include owners, employees, customers, suppliers, investors, the local community, even the government. It's a pretty broad category.
So it's not just about the people who own the business or invest in it, it's about anyone who's affected by the business's operations.
Exactly. And understanding the needs and expectations of all these different stakeholders is really important for making good business decisions. A decision that benefits one group of stakeholders might have a negative impact on another group, so businesses need to find ways to balance those competing interests.
So how do businesses figure out who their stakeholders are and what they want?
Well, there are a few frameworks that can help with that. The textbook talks about 3 key factors to consider: power, urgency, and legitimacy.
Okay, break those down for me.
Sure, power refers to the ability of a stakeholder to influence the business's decisions. Urgency relates to how pressing their claims are,
Mm?
and legitimacy refers to the validity of their claims. So, for example, a major customer who accounts for a large percentage of a business's revenue, they would have high power, high urgency, and high legitimacy.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about a stakeholder group that might not have a lot of power, but their issue is really urgent, like, say, a community group concerned about the environmental impact of a factory?
That's a great example. Even though that group might not have the same economic power as a big customer, their concerns could quickly become very urgent and legitimate if they gain public support or media attention.
So it's not just a static thing. The power, urgency, and legitimacy of different stakeholder groups can shift over time.
Exactly. Businesses need to be aware of those shifts and adapt their strategies accordingly.
Okay, and then there's this concept of corporate social responsibility, or CSR. It feels like that's become a really hot topic in recent years.
Yeah, it has. CSR is basically about recognizing that businesses have a responsibility to operate ethically and sustainably. They need to consider the impact of their actions on their employees, their customers, the communities they operate in, and the environment.
So it's about going beyond just making profits and thinking about the bigger picture, the impact on society and the planet.
Exactly. And the textbook breaks down CSR into three pillars: environmental sustainability, economic sustainability, and social sustainability.
Okay, so environmental sustainability is about reducing the business's impact on the environment, right?
Yeah, things like reducing carbon emissions, conserving resources, minimizing waste. Economic sustainability is about making sure the business is profitable in the long term, but also paying fair wages, treating suppliers ethically, all of that. And social sustainability is about promoting diversity and inclusion within the workplace, supporting community initiatives, basically being a good corporate citizen.
So it's about recognizing that a business's success is tied to the well-being of its stakeholders and the health of the planet.
Absolutely. It's a more holistic view of business, recognizing that businesses are part of a larger system and they have a responsibility to contribute to the well-being of that system.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The macro environment, stakeholders, corporate social responsibility. It feels like we're getting a really well-rounded understanding of the business world, all the different factors that come into play.
Yeah, we've laid a really solid foundation. And all of this leads us to the next topic, which is ethics. We'll be diving into the ethical considerations that professionals face in the business world and exploring how to navigate those tricky situations in our next session.
Okay, so we've talked about stakeholders, we've talked about corporate social responsibility, and all of that really leads us to this, I think, crucial topic of ethics, right? Because it's one thing to know the rules of the game, but it's another to actually navigate those real-life situations where the right thing to do isn't always so clear.
You hit the nail on the head there. Ethical dilemmas, they're a real part of the business world, and our textbook really dives into, the importance of ethical behavior, especially for professional accountants. It even lays out the AAT ethical code as a guide.
Oh, interesting. So what does this code actually say? Like, what are the key principles it emphasizes?
Well, it highlights 5 fundamental principles: integrity, objectivity, professional competence, and due care, confidentiality, and professional behavior. It's like a framework for ethical conduct.
Okay, those sound like pretty solid pillars to build on, but how do they actually play out in real life? Like, can you give me an example of a situation where these principles might be tested?
Sure. Imagine you're an accountant and you're under pressure to, say, manipulate some financial data to make your company's performance look better. That's a situation where your integrity and your objectivity are really put to the test.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It takes guts to stand up for what's right, especially when there's pressure to do otherwise.
It does. But ultimately, upholding ethical standards is essential for maintaining the trust and credibility of the accounting profession. People need to be able to rely on accountants to provide accurate and honest information.
Absolutely. Okay, the textbook also mentions conflicts of interest. What exactly does that mean, and how can accountants avoid those tricky situations?
Well, a conflict of interest arises when, an accountant's personal interests or relationships might compromise their professional judgment. For example, imagine an accountant who provides services to 2 competing businesses.
Okay, yeah, I see how that could be a problem.
Right, because the accountant has access to confidential information from both clients. And that could create a situation where, they might be tempted to use that information to benefit one client over the other.
So how can accountants handle these situations ethically?
Well, transparency is key. They need to disclose any potential conflicts to their clients and be very clear about how they're going to handle confidential information. In some cases, it might even be necessary to, step away from one of the clients to avoid any appearance of impropriety.
It sounds like ethical decision making is often about finding that balance between, what's good for business and what's the right thing to do.
You've got it.
Mm.
It's about using professional judgment, guided by those ethical principles, to navigate those gray areas where there's not always a clear-cut answer.
Now, let's talk about something that can feel a bit intimidating, but is super important for anyone working in finance: money laundering. What exactly is money laundering, and what role do accountants play in preventing it?
Money laundering is basically taking money that's been obtained illegally and making it look like it came from legitimate sources. It's a way to clean dirty money. And accountants, they're often on the front lines of this fight against financial crime.
Okay, so what specific responsibilities do accountants have in this area?
Well, the textbook outlines three key things: client due diligence, recognizing red flags, and reporting suspicious activities. Client due diligence means really understanding who your clients are, what they do, where their money comes from.
So it's about making sure you're not unknowingly working with criminals.
Exactly. And then recognizing red flags, that's about being alert to any unusual transactions or activities that might suggest money laundering.
Like what? What are some examples of red flags?
Well, it could be something like a client suddenly making large cash deposits, or maybe they're involved in businesses that seem unnecessarily complex or secretive. Those are things that should raise some eyebrows.
Okay, and if an accountant does suspect money laundering, what should they do?
They have a legal and ethical obligation to report those suspicions to the authorities. And the textbook walks through the process of filing a suspicious activity report, or SAR. It's crucial to provide as much detailed information as possible.
It sounds like a big responsibility, but it's also kind of reassuring to know that accountants are playing such a key role in preventing financial crime.
Absolutely. They're essential for maintaining the integrity of the financial system.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about technology and data, because it feels like we're living in a world where information is constantly flowing, coming at us from all directions. How can businesses make sense of all that data and use it effectively?
That's a great question. And the textbook starts by emphasizing that, different stakeholders need different types of information. So the first step is understanding who needs what information and why.
So a marketing manager might need data on customer demographics and buying habits, while a financial analyst might need data on sales trends and profitability.
Exactly. It's about tailoring the information to the specific needs of the audience. And just as important as the information itself is the quality of that information. The textbook talks about 7 attributes of valuable information using the acronym ACCURATE, accurate, complete, cost-beneficial, user-targeted, relevant, authoritative, and timely.
I love that acronym. It's a great reminder to always think critically about the information we're using to make sure it's reliable and relevant.
It's also important to distinguish between formal and informal information. Formal information, that's stuff that's documented, communicated through official channels like reports and presentations. Informal information, that's more casual, maybe shared through conversations or emails.
Okay, so both types of information have their place in the business world.
Absolutely. Formal information provides structure and accountability, while informal information can be really valuable for fostering collaboration and innovation.
Now let's talk about big data, a term we hear a lot these days. Can you explain what it actually means and why it's so important for businesses?
Sure. Big data is basically data that's so large and complex that it can't be handled using traditional methods. It's characterized by 5 V's: volume, velocity, variety, veracity, and value.
Okay, break those down for me.
So volume refers to the sheer amount of data. Velocity is the speed at which it's generated and processed. Variety is the different types of data. Veracity is the accuracy of the data. And value is the ability to extract insights from that data.
So it's not just about the quantity of data, it's about the quality, the speed, and the ability to actually make sense of it all.
Exactly. And the textbook uses the example of an airline to illustrate how big data can be used to, optimize operations, personalize customer experiences, even predict maintenance needs for aircraft.
Wow, that's incredible. It sounds like big data has the potential to revolutionize entire industries.
It definitely does. But there are challenges too, like the need for specialized skills and technology to handle all that data and the importance of protecting data security and privacy.
Right, and we can't forget about the human element either. We can't just blindly trust algorithms to make all our decisions.
Absolutely. The textbook stresses the importance of professional skepticism, of questioning assumptions, validating data sources, and being aware of potential biases.
So it's about using data as a tool to inform our decisions, but not letting it replace human judgment and intuition.
Exactly. Data can be incredibly powerful, but it's up to us to use it ethically and responsibly.
Now, let's talk about communicating all these insights because data without clear communication is kind of useless, right? It's like having a symphony without an orchestra.
I love that analogy. And you're absolutely right. The textbook dedicates a whole section to the importance of effective communication, highlighting how crucial it is for fostering understanding, driving action, and building relationships.
It seems like effective communication is about more than just presenting facts and figures, though. It's about telling a story, engaging your audience, making the information come alive.
Exactly. And it's also about choosing the right medium for your message. Was it a formal report, a presentation, an email, a social media post? The way you communicate should be tailored to the audience and the context.
The textbook also offers some practical tips for improving written communication, like using clear language, structuring your documents effectively, and incorporating visuals to make the information more engaging.
And it emphasizes the importance of not just giving feedback, but also receiving it. Active listening and seeking feedback are crucial for making sure your message is getting across and for constantly improving your communication skills.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into the world of business. We've explored everything from business structures and funding to micro and macroeconomics, stakeholders, ethical dilemmas, money laundering, the power of big data, and the art of effective communication. It's been quite a journey.
It really has. And, we've only scratched the surface. The business world is dynamic. It's constantly evolving. But hopefully, this deep dive has given our listeners a solid foundation to build upon.
I hope so too. And as we wrap up this episode, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. Never stop learning. The business world is full of surprises, so stay curious, embrace new challenges, and never stop exploring. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.